Bit of background about me. You can see that I obviously write books. My 10th book is actually coming out later this year, which I'm very proud of. So I do that. I obviously do a lot of speaking and a lot of platform speaking and also working in workshops as well. And I also do a lot of executive coaching. And as you can see up in the top right-hand corner, I still play rugby. And I'm in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane. And I've got to tell you that we only play every second week because at my age, it takes 2 years to recover. So, but anyway, just a little bit of interest about me. So the book that I wanted to refer to today, of course, is Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. And obviously, I've got a chapter in there on trust, in fact, 2 chapters. But just to give you a sense that I've received some wonderful endorsements from a range of people in the sporting world, quite famous people in the sporting world, in fact, both here in Australia and New Zealand, and also people such as the current Commissioner of Queensland Police, Katarina Carroll. So there's been lots of great interest from lots of people who've endorsed the book, and the book's also been endorsed by Nick Farr-Jones, who is, for those that aren't aware, is a former Wallaby captain and great who steered Australia to a World Cup victory. So we've got some great testimonials, and I really appreciate those from those people, which is great. So now in the book, there are 8 characteristics of high-performing teams, which of course you'd be aware of. Now, you can see from the model on the right-hand side, there are 8 characteristics around the outside. You might say, well, where did they all come from? Well, they came from my observations working across 21 industries, but it also comes from research as well. So I'm not suggesting there's only 8, but I can say to you for sure that if you showed me any high-performing team anywhere, regardless of whether it was in the sporting world, business, wherever, I'll guarantee that these 8 characteristics are fairly evident. Now, one of those characteristics, of course, is building trust. And you can see I've highlighted that because that's obviously what I want to talk about today. Now, you might say, is trust the highest characteristics? I think they're all interrelated. I think they all are important. But at the end of the day, a team that's not trusting each other is going to be a team that's going to probably not achieve a lot, certainly as a team at least. So it's an obvious topic to look at. Now, one of the objections that people have about this notion of trust is that it is true that trust does ebb and flow. And of course, you know, 1 minute we can trust, the next minute we can't. Trust will vary depending on who we're talking to. It's an elusive topic. It's hard to get. It's easy to lose. So all of those things we're aware of as human beings, of course. And so it might well be that one of the key objections around this topic is, I don't have much control over it, so why should I worry about it? How can I control whether, you know, Fred and Mary actually trust each other in my team? Well, the leader, of course, sets the tone. And if the leader, of course, isn't setting the tone, then it's likely that the tone will be set and there will be a mistrust in the team rather than trust. So a leader does have an extremely important role to play. And so I guess I want to approach this from the point of view of what a leader should do, that is a team leader, and what they shouldn't do as well. And so, yes, it's worth it and it's worth making the effort. Having said that, just because you do everything right in terms of trust doesn't necessarily mean that that permeates throughout everything that you do in a team. So let's have a look at 3 things that we're going to cover today. I wanted to cover the concept, there we go. I wanted to talk about the elements of trust. Now, what I want to talk about here is that this comes from my book, which I co-wrote with Aubrey Warren, Conversations at Work. We do know from research, and we do know perhaps just from our own practical observations, that there are basically 5 elements that are critically important to trust. And if any of these elements are violated, then it's likely that trust diminishes. So I'm going to talk about them. And as I talk about them, you might want to consider from your own point of view, how well do you relate to each of these? And, do you honestly do whatever you can to make sure that you reinforce these elements in your team? So you can see they're across the top: openness, acceptance, congruence, reliability, and competence. Now, when I finish talking about these, I'm going to share with you an outstanding exercise that you might like to try with your team. A very practical exercise, and it's a great way of building trust up in your team. So I'll give you something very practical to work with. So I guess let's talk about each of these at the moment. So these aren't necessarily in any order. So frankly, they're all important. And as I said before, if one of them is, not in place, then it's going to create problems. So openness is a very important element. Now, what we mean by openness means appropriate openness. And when you're having conversations with people, giving a sense of yourself, sharing a little bit about yourself. And I think sometimes leaders feel that they've got to be in this bubble and not share themselves. But a leader who shares a little bit about themselves, what do I mean by that? Maybe their opinions, what do they believe, what do they not believe? Those sorts of things, perhaps some of their interests, those sort of things are important, because what it does is it gives the other person a sense of your own self-confidence, and also it gives the other person a sense of your willingness to connect with them. And what you find is when you're open with people, there's a tendency that they feel a little safer to be open with you. That's the point about this. Now, obviously, you can go too far. I mean, if you're in an elevator, for example, and you start talking about your personal relationship with the person who's a stranger in the elevator, they'll want to get out at the next floor. Clearly, you can go too far with this. And you've got to work out where your judgment is around this. And we do know that introverts and extroverts have different thresholds around how open they're willing to be. But the bottom line is, if you're a closed book and you play your cards close to your chest, and it's hard to get to know you, then that probably means that you're not encouraging a level of trust and rapport with the other person. So that's obviously important. The second thing that's important there is that we probably need to be accepting of others. And what that means is that it's the flip side of the coin, the openness coin. So on the one hand, obviously we need to be open, but that's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is really about being accepting of other people and other opinions and views. And again, from a personality point of view, some of us are more open-minded than others, or accepting of other points of view. But we've got to be, if we want to be open with people and we want them to be open with us, what we've got to do is be accepting of their perspective. Now, accepting, of course, doesn't mean agreeing. And that's important, because you can accept someone's opinion, but it doesn't necessarily mean you embrace it or agree with it. So people who share information about themselves, they're obviously taking a risk, aren't they? And of course, it's a risk, so they're wondering whether that's a good idea. Now, of course, if they take that risk and you or whoever it is doesn't accept that point of view, then obviously they're not likely to open up again. So the acceptance part is extremely important. We know that there's a chance of rejection and judgment. So often what we don't do is divulge something personal about ourselves. Now, again, there are different thresholds around this, of course, but of course you want people to find you approachable, and you want people to share their point of view, I'm sure. And so being accepting of different points of view without judging can be an extremely important part of that. Now, congruence is the concept where what you communicate is matched, or your words are matched with what you mean. So now what that might mean is that certainly in this country, in Australia, we often talk about people who are straight shooters. What we mean by that, of course, is people who say it just as it is. Now, of course, you know, there's a line here, because obviously if you just tell people exactly what you think, then that can at some point be offensive. So there's got to be some degree of tact or diplomacy around that. But we tend to respect people, and certainly the research backs this up. We tend to respect people who are pretty straight. They talk straight. And we don't like people who sort of contribute in qualifications or hesitant phrases, or what we might call sitting on the fence. So we like people to have a point of view, and we like people to share that point of view and be clear with people, so that what you see is what you get. So there's obviously got to be a balance there, because you can go too far with this, and there's a balance between bluntness and avoidance, and you've got to find that balance. But we do respect people who what you see is what you get is essentially a way of putting it. Now, moving on from congruence, reliability, I think, is one of the key ones here. And I see plenty of evidence in the 21 industries that I work across of a lack of reliability or unreliability. And that is that obviously when you promise something as a team leader, if you don't follow through on that promise, then clearly you are unreliable. Your word is not your bond, as they say. So what that basically means is that what we need to do is to, as the old adage is, we need to under-promise and over-deliver, not over-promise and under-deliver. So I guess the point is, and a very practical example of this is, don't promise something that you can't deliver on. So where this becomes difficult is in the corridor. So you're walking down the corridor, someone walks towards you, they want to talk to you about such and such. They want you to commit to something. And because you're on the way to a meeting, you feel this inclination to just give them an answer and move on. Now, that's often not a great idea, because you're just doing that because you want to get to your meeting and you just want to get that interaction over and done with. You're far better off to say to the other person, look, leave it with me. I need to think about what you've said, and I need to consider that. And that buys you time and space to come back to them when you're a little bit more in the right frame of mind to be able to, deal with the issue. So it's not fobbing someone off. It's actually just being very genuine, because you still have to go back and you still have to find that person, and you still have to discuss that with them. So I think the key thing there is not to overpromise and underdeliver, or procrastinate, or being inconsistent. People want to know that when you say something, your word is your bond, and ultimately that's what that means. So be very wary of how you approach those sorts of things. Now, finally, of the 5 things, this is an interesting one, because competence, we tend to trust people who have a high level of competence. Now, as a team leader, you're not supposed to be delving into all the details technically, but people want to at least know that you've got some mastery over what we're talking about. So, for example, if you took me and I became your leader, your team leader, and I knew nothing about your industry, then I've got an uphill battle, because I don't have any competence and I can't bluff it. And so I'm going to get myself into some difficult issues there. So competence is sometimes overlooked. And look, the truth is there's a tendency that we trust others in certain situations. So for example, if we go to a lawyer for legal advice, then we kind of, in most cases, trust what they're saying, because they've got a level of competence that we're actually hiring, if you like. But if we went to that lawyer for relationship advice, we probably aren't going to be too trusting of what they have to say about that, because they haven't yet demonstrated a competence in that area. So we do need a reasonable level of competence, and it's not something that we can bluff our way through. But there's the 5 different elements of trust. And I guess the point is, being conscious of those and doing those as much as you possibly can make a significant difference. Okay, are there any comments or questions that people have got at this stage before we launch into the practical example that I was going to talk about? Okay, all good. Okay, let's now talk about, now in my book, I talk about these 5 issues, and more importantly, I talk about how you can apply them, some strategies for applying those. I've also talking, and I know this has gained a lot of resonance around the world, my team values charter, which is a very simple exercise you can do with your team. And you can basically do this immediately. I mean, if you had a team meeting, for example, this afternoon or whatever time, next time you meet, it would work perfectly well. It takes about 20 minutes to do. And what it does is it galvanizes your team around a set of values. And that's why it's really powerful. It's not time consuming. And it comes from one of my books, The New Influencing Toolkit. But I've also talking about it in Winning Teams as well. So let's have a look at how it works. It works like this. Basically, the idea is that in the meeting, so you have a meeting with your team members, and you ask them to bring something to record their answers on, whether it's, an iPad or a pen on paper, whatever it might be. They've got to record their answers in the meeting. Now, the truth is, you might think to yourself, well, why couldn't they do it before the meeting to save us time? Well, I wouldn't risk that, because there's chances are somebody will think, will not do it. And then you've got to wait for everybody to do it. In other words, everyone's got to participate, including you, by the way. So in the meeting, you ask everybody these 4 questions. And the idea is you ask the question, and then what people do is they write down their answer. And so you just keep asking these questions. Now, you do this yourself first. So you make sure that you've responded to these 4 questions before the meeting, because it adds no credibility whatsoever if you're just asking everybody else and you don't bother to participate. So question 1 is, what is one value that's important to you when working in groups or teams? All right, so that's question 1. And question 2, okay, so we've just got some audio issues there by the sound of it. Sorry about that. I'm doing my best. I don't know, my audio is telling me it's working, so I'll just keep going. Is anyone else having sound issues, or it's all good? We'll just see what others have got to say. Don't want to be talking to myself, of course. No issues at this end from Sydney. All good, all good, all good. Okay, it's all good. Okay, sorry about that. I might be the local internet. So the first question is, what is one value that is important to you when working in groups or teams? And you might say, mine would be respect. So I just say respect. Now I'm not saying that's just me, right? So I'd write down the word respect. Then the next, when you wait, where you can see everyone's eyes looking up, the next question is, what's your definition of that value? And now if I was responding to that, I might say respect is when people are prepared to listen to others, even when they may not agree with their point of view. All right, so that's my definition. Why is it of value to you? Well, I like to feel that I'm respected and my opinions are valued when working with others is ultimately what my point is. And that's why. Now, this is really insightful, because it's good for you as a team leader to find out why people embrace these values. Normally, we embrace values because things have happened in our life that have, perhaps people embrace fairness and equity, for example, because they come from a culture where fairness and equity wasn't common practice. But nevertheless, you don't want to get into that detail, but it's just good to know why they find that important. Now, the 4th question, and this is ultimately where the rubber meets the road, the 4th question really is, what behaviours would be consistent with that value? All right, so what behaviours would be consistent with that value? Now, this is important because ultimately values drive behaviour. And so I might write down, if you were asking me, I might say, well, you know, not interrupting someone else while they speak would be an example of respect, in my view. Other people might have a different point of view, of course. So what you do is you get everybody to have written all of those responses down. And look, trust me, it works. Trust me, it works really, really well. It works extremely well. So I wouldn't worry about this. I've done this with hard, tough detectives in a police jurisdiction. I've done this with people in a whole range of different industries. I've done this with people working in an orchestra. It works extremely well. And I'll talk about why in a moment. Now, what you do is you get everyone then to share. What they're doing now is they're sharing their responses. And you go around the table, start with yourself, share your responses to those 4 questions, get everyone else to do the same. At the end of that exercise, you then will probably have a series of, well, you will have a series of values and a statement. The statement, of course, is the definition. You don't need to worry about steps 3 and 4. You record the values and the definition. Now, if 2 people in your team have exactly the same value, that's not a problem. In fact, that's quite a good thing, because what that ultimately means is that people are on the same page. Where it can be problematic is they've got different definitions of it. So what you do is you ask them to get together to talk about their definitions and come up with a definition that they both can be happy with. Once that's all been done, you create a team values charter. Now, why is it work? Why is it powerful? Don't let the simplicity of this fool you. Why this is powerful is that everybody has got skin in the game. Everybody has actually got a value in the charter. And the quid pro quo here is that we will honor your value if you honor ours. And ultimately what you've got is it's a bit like on a building site. You've got a scaffolding, a values scaffolding now, where you can hold people accountable to a series of values, which is brilliant. And I can assure you what will happen is you will find that people in your team are holding each other accountable for the team values charter as well. And that's when you know it's working really well. And all of this elevates trust. So, and of course, you as a leader can look at everything that happens in your team through 2 different channels now. On the one hand, you can look at things through the channel of process, procedures, systems, which is how we'd normally look at things. You know, have they followed the system? Have they followed the process? Have they met the timeline? All of that stuff is what team leaders would do anyway. So you've already got that. But you've got another string to your bow now, and this is the string of looking at things through a set of values. Not your values. Remember, you're the custodian for the values of the team. So you, for example, if somebody is on the phone and and loses their cool while they're talking to a customer, they're getting upset and angry, and one of the values in the charter is professionalism. You can then talk to that person after they've got off the phone, obviously, and you can say, do you think that the way you communicated with that customer was consistent with our values? Now, the obvious answer is no, because they weren't as professional as they probably could be. But what you're doing is you're getting them to evaluate their own behavior, you see. And so that becomes, so you see how you've got 2 strings to your bow, and it works out extremely well. Sometimes you need to talk to people about processes. Sometimes you can talk to them about values. Sometimes you can talk about both. But ultimately, you've got something there that gives you a sense of structure around how the team works. And this is what psychologists call psychological safety. All right, so give it a try. It works out extremely well, I can assure you. Okay, now I just wanted to give a quick plug, if I may. I've got now every Friday I have one of these webinars, every single Friday. And it's not always just at this time, it varies, but it's always on a Friday. And they're 30 minutes long, and you are most welcome to attend those, any of those at all. All you've got to do is register like you did today. So obviously next Friday, I've got another one, and that's on at 10 o'clock, and it's on my new book, my latest book, not Winning Teams, but the one that's coming out later this year, Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximizing Performance Through Empowerment. And I'm going to discuss a very interesting topic, and that is the them and us relationship over? You know, them and us managers versus employees. So come along and have a listen and contribute if you'd like. And you can see the link down here at the bottom. So when I send you the slides this afternoon, which you'll get for registering, plus a copy of the audio, the recording, you'll get both of those things. You can easily register for that. The other thing I'd like to say to you is if you would like to purchase my book, Winning Teams, I'm going to give you a discount today. And the Amazon price is $35, or it depends on where you are in the world. But I'm also going to, Alexandra is just saying that them and us is going very strong in my organization. Yeah, well, look, come along and Alex, and have a bit of a listen, and you'll probably see some familiar things next week. But I'm also going to talk about how you can change that, you know, that employment relationship as well. But yeah, come along and have a listen. $35 plus postage. Today, I'm going to give you the book for $25 plus postage. Now, bear in mind, if it's overseas, it might be a little bit more than the normal postage, but I'm going to give you a discount. All you need to do in order to get a hold of that, is just to send me an email, and there's my email address at the bottom. So I'll send you an email this afternoon. If you'd like a copy, just come back. I'll send you a little coupon. You can take that coupon in and you'll get your book for a discount price. All right, so that's it from me. I don't think there's anything else at this stage that I need to discuss with you. Any last minute questions before we wrap up? All good? Okay. All good. Okay. So I'll just get out of this and not, yeah, okay. So thanks everyone. I've enjoyed working with you this morning, and just remember that I have one of these every single Friday, and you're more than welcome to attend, and hopefully you'll get something practical out of it that will help you. So thanks everyone. Have a wonderful weekend wherever you are in the world. And who knows, we might catch up next Friday. Thank you, everyone, and all the very best. Thank you and goodbye.